Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Friday Night with Friends. You have joined the digital campus of Newark United Pentecostal Church, and we are excited to be with you. Everybody, welcome. We love Friday Night with Friends, and I just love it. It is one of the most exciting times for us. I love our broadcasts throughout the week, but this one is special. It is a time where we get to spend time with friends and explore topics in a very relaxed and enjoyable environment. In fact, we're talking about, as a team, continuing this theme even when we're back in person. More on that at a later point. First, before we go any further, if this is your first time with us, we welcome you. We are so glad that you have chosen to stop the scroll and to spend a little bit of time with us. You can learn all about us and gain more information at newarkupc.info. I also want to say thank you to my co-host, Sister Erica. She'll be handling the questions tonight and helping us out. Now, let me tell you a little bit of a story real quick before I introduce our guest. And so Regina and I, a few years back, met a family on deputation, missionary deputation, the Phelps. And we hit it off and became really enjoyed that time together. They were in our home. And so a few years went by and they went into missions in Uganda and then later transferred to the country of Nigeria. And while in Nigeria, I had contact back with them and found out they were having trouble getting folks to come to Nigeria. And we maybe will explore some of that a little bit later. But so Regina and I ended up taking a short trip, a 10-day trip to the country of Nigeria. And it was an experience. It was a country that was in much chaos. It was a country that had many, many challenges. But we found a people that we fell in love with. And so we decided we would return. And so that was in the summer of 2016. And we returned in April and then again in August of 2017, 2-week stints each time. And it's there that I met my friend that is on with me tonight. In fact, I met him and his wife, Darla. Now, I need to tell you up front, in fact, I have him off screen to give him a moment here because this is going to be a broadcast that will have some emotion because he's going to tell us their story. When they finished their missions tenure in 2019 and came home, in the following year, as you all know, we faced COVID. And in that time, his lovely wife, Darla, contracted COVID and passed away. And so tonight is their story being told by him, but he's going to feel it. He's going to be missing her. And so I want you to understand that we may, along with our laughter, Gerry and I love to make fun of one another and give each other a hard time, but we may also have some tears. And so we're going to share with them. But we met Gerry and Darla. We stayed in their home. And over the next 3 visits, we spent time with them. And they became very good friends of ours. I'm not sure if they count us as friends, but we counted them as friends. And I am so excited to have my friend, Brother Gerry McLean, a retired missionary from Nigeria. Gerry, welcome to the broadcast.
Well, thank you very much. Happy to be with you.
Absolutely. So when I first met Gerry, they were in a mission house there in Enugu, and that's where the Bible school, the first Bible school is. There's now 2 Bible schools, one in Enugu and one in Lagos. And so I went there, and we got to his house. And the first thing is Gerry and Darla are very frugal missionaries. If you want to understand money going a long way, Gerry and Darla knew how to make it go a long way. This man did not believe in air conditioning at all. And so I had made arrangements ahead of time. I said, Gerry, I'll pay the bill. I'll do everything. You got to turn on some air conditioning. Well, so we get there. Well, one of my coping mechanisms, I don't know, Gerry, if you remember this, was I drank my Cokes or my Pepsis. So yes. I'm hardly there. I hardly know the man. I've just met him. I've heard good things about him. We actually supported him from the moment he was a missionary in Nigeria. We took him on at General Conference and had supported him since 2001. But I'd never met him. His deputation schedule never brought him through Newark. So I'm barely there, and the man starts razzing me about how much Pepsi I'm drinking. He's like, oh, my goodness, you want another Pepsi? I'm going to have to send somebody to the store to get more Pepsi. So this is the tenor of our relationship from the beginning. Is he would razz me and I would razz him. You want to add anything there, Gerry? Do you have any any comments of rudeness that you want to add to the picture here?
It wasn't Pepsi, it was Coke, and it was usually over Frosted Flakes.
There you go. That's exactly right. I would drink it first thing in the morning just to get me going. Because Gerry's an early bird and I was not. So you got to understand, in the heat of Nigeria, which I was thankful for, him scheduling it this way. But the schedule would start, I would start teaching at 8 o'clock. Yeah, folks, 8 o'clock, I'm teaching. Now, understand, Gerry's up at 5, so 8 o'clock, half the day's gone. Anyway, two different birds. All right, so let me start the story this way. Gerry and I've talked a little bit ahead of time. In 2001, the church in Nigeria had gotten into disarray. This was very early. Gerry and Darla had come there as aimers first, and now were appointed missionaries along with another missionary couple. Nigeria is, as a country, is a very corrupt country. In fact, it should not be in the economic states that it finds itself. It has oil, therefore it has access to resources, but it's a very corrupt country. And that had affected the church. And so the regional director had actually just simply wiped the church out down to, they had a Bible school and a single church attached to that Bible school. They had 70 members and one Nigerian pastor. This is the year 2001. When Gerry and Darla left Nigeria, now, of course, there was a missionary family that had joined them, the Phelps I already referenced, that are still there in Nigeria. But when they left in 2019, the church in Nigeria had 212 churches. It had 24 preaching points. It had 31,768 constituents or members, and it had 299 pastors. Now, in case you missed this point, I want to say that again. When Gerry and Darla were there and the regional director said, let's start over. Corruption has affected the church. Let's start over. There was a Bible school. There was a single church. There were 70 members. And there was one Nigerian pastor. 18 years later, 212 churches, 24 preaching points, 31,768 constituents, and 299 pastors. Now, you're expecting us to tell you that story tonight. But that's what we tend to do. We tend to tell that exciting and that story that we get very, very excited about. And while I celebrate everything that Gerry and Darla did, and it was an honor to be in their home to see their work, tonight I've asked Gerry to share with us, how did he and Darla, a skinny guy from Wisconsin, a beautiful lady from Oklahoma, who, by the way, Roy Moss was her youth president. Dad, you are officially old. Anyway, how did they get to the mission field? We always tell the story of the mission field, but what about the ordinary people? And I don't mean that with all joking aside, any disrespect towards Gerry or Darla, but how do ordinary people get to where God can do something extraordinary? And that's the story I want to explore with Gerry. So my first question for you, Gerry, is, where were you born? Where was Darla born? How did you meet? And was missions on your mind when you met?
Well, I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and that was my home. My family were not churchgoers. My mother was a Roman Catholic. We attended Mass some until I was probably about 5 years old. But we didn't have Bibles. We didn't pray, anything like that. So when I graduated from high school, and actually both of my parents were alcoholics. There's some other horrific things that happened in my childhood. So by the time I went to college, and I was the first person in our family to go to college, to the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, I was really had no reason to live. I came to the place where I was suicidal. And a friend of mine who had been witnessing to me for probably 4 years, he continued to witness to me. And at the age of 19, I came into the church. Darla was born in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, attended Robert Whalen's church, and later Brother Mark Parker took over that church. Darla's mother was in the church, came into the church when Darla was about 2 years old. Her father never did come into the church. Her father was disabled when Darla was very young, and her mother had terminal cancer when Darla was in high school. Now, Darla, because she was raised in the church, she had a calling to go to Africa. She had been in a youth prayer meeting, And at the time, she describes herself as being backslidden, but she never stopped going to church. And after this particular youth meeting, she was in the restroom, and one of the girls came in and said, I really think you need to come back in and pray a little more. So she came back in, and while she was praying, the Lord began to speak to her, and the Lord asked her if she loved him. And of course, she said, I love you. And he said back, would you go to Africa? And she said, no. And so the Lord asked her again, do you love me? Yes. Would you do anything for me? Yes. Will you go to Africa? No. And the third time, when the Lord asked her if she'd go to Africa, she agreed that she would go, but she told the Lord she would never tell anybody about her call to Africa.
So Gerry, this sounds a lot like the Lord and Peter. Do you love me? Yes. Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Feed my... It sounds like the Lord did the same kind of a thing.
Exactly. And in her case, she knew that she would have to go to Bible school. She felt that if she was going to be a missionary, she'd have to meet somebody that had the same burden and call, and they would get married and eventually go to Africa. Her mother was dying in her senior year of high school, and after she graduated, she was prepared to stay home with her mother and take care of her mother. And her mother at that time absolutely insisted that Darla go to Bible school. She said, no. She said, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. You can't stop that. Go to school. If you don't go to school now, you won't go after I die. So Darla went to Gateway, which everybody at her home church, they were all ABI graduates, but she went to Gateway. And when she got to Gateway, she got there in September of 71, and her mother died in November of 71. I got saved in March. Actually, I got baptized in March of 72, and I knew right away that I needed to go to Bible school. I felt even as a child that I was called to Africa. I can't explain why. Never, went to church or anything, but I knew God had called me, and it was to Africa. And so I submitted an application to Gateway. At that time, my pastor had never signed for anybody to go to Bible school, but he did sign my application. And when they got the application, it was approved, but they said, you don't have the Holy Ghost. You can't, we need to know when you got the Holy Ghost. And that Sunday night in church, I got the Holy Ghost and sent the application back on Monday. And a month later, I was at Bible school.
So you got God to get on the Bible school's timetable, huh? He gave you the Holy Ghost in time for Bible college.
In time for Bible school, but I was woefully unprepared. I didn't know the Old Testament from the New Testament. I didn't have any idea. They, in one of the first tests they gave to entering freshmen, they asked, to name the prophets. I didn't know what a prophet was. I knew nothing really about Pentecost. I had only been in the church for just such a very short time. And, I didn't even know you were supposed to go out to eat after church on Sunday night. And, it really was a shock to me to get there. And really, I never felt like I fit in, because most of the, students that were there were, born and raised in the United Pentecostal Church. So that's how Darla and I met. Actually, she worked for the school in the printing office. I was a janitor. We both were paying our way through school. And one of my friends at the school, he did ask me to try and arrange a meeting with Darla and with him. But it turned out that the meeting got arranged between Darla and I. And so we met in March of 74, and we were married in August of 74. So it really didn't take very long that, we knew we were in love, and we both were dedicated to serving the Lord. However, neither one of us told the other one that we were called to Africa.
Oops. That's interesting, isn't it? So you
Yes.
both held it under your hats and didn't say it.
Right. And so I came, after we graduated, we came back to Milwaukee, and I go to Brother Frank Chamel's church at that time, as our home church. And he had asked me to preach on a Wednesday night. And on that particular Wednesday night, by this time we had two small boys, 2 years old and a newborn, and they were sick. So she stayed home that Wednesday night. And while I was preaching about Abraham and his willingness to do whatever God asked him to do. And I said, I'd even be willing to go to Africa. Well, before I ever got home, and you have to remember that was way before cell phones. The phones were on the wall. And she got 3 phone calls asking her if she was ready to go to Africa. And when I got home, she was furious. She didn't talk to me it was a good 2 weeks.
Oh my.
And she was angry. She felt like the Lord had double crossed her, that, when she agreed to go to Africa, it was really, she thought that, she passed the test. She never thought she'd actually have to go. And so she told me what happened to her when she was 16, how the Lord talked to her, and we talked. And
after she ignored you for 2 weeks.
After 2 weeks, yeah, she said, well, I need to tell you why I'm so mad. I'm really not mad at you. I'm mad at God. And so we taught at the Christian school at Parkway for some years. And then we applied to go to the mission field in 1984. And we were declined because we hadn't pastored. So instead of going to Africa, we ended up on the Arctic Circle. We were pastoring in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, where we get 155 inches of snow a year, and not unusual to have 25 to 30 below temperatures. And so we were there for 7 years.
That really prepared you for Africa, right? Because that's what you faced in Africa, right?
Really, yeah. Going from the Arctic Circle to the equator.
Let me insert here too, Gerry, for those that don't know, things are much different now in global missions. Global missions, a lot of our missionaries are beginning to come from a process called AIM, and they build there. But back in the day that Gerry's referring to, back in the old days, see, there's my dig to get Gerry. Yeah. Back when they built log cabins and everything else. Back in the old days, part of how a missionary would prove themselves in order to go to the mission field was they would pastor. And so you hear within this story that they were sent. So you set the world on fire in Michigan, is that right? Did you,
No,
have a blazing revival? You built a mega church up there? Is that what happened?
Well, we were 7 years in Sault Ste. Marie, and we inherited a church that just was a disaster in every way. And one by one, really, the members left. And in that case, it turned out to be addition by subtraction. And I remember one night, a lady that had been in the church for 32 years, and every time she testified, she would testify how long she had been in church, and she played the piano, and she basically let us know that we couldn't do it without her, that we needed her there. And so one night she was annoyed with me because in the morning service, I didn't tell her what I was preaching at night. And she said, well, the other pastor always told me what he was preaching. And I said, well, I'm not the other pastor. And she got annoyed. And when she came at night, she said that, she was quitting. And I said, well, I reached out my hand. I shook her hand. I said, we're really going to miss you. I'll have a letter of transfer to you by tomorrow morning. And so, we called her bluff. She left. And Andrew, our oldest son, he was 11 years old. And I told him, well, Andrew, you're going to have to play the keyboard. He had never touched the keyboard before, but really, he ended up playing in that church and ended up playing at Parkway, was music minister there, had a choir at one time over 100 voices, and toured the country with a group that he had made. So today he's pastoring. So God was able really to turn what looked like a disaster into a very, prepared another minister for the harvest.
So when you left Sault Ste. Marie, the numbers, the story was not
The
the same as
story
leaving
there,
Africa.
we had, the 7 years we were there, we built the church up to about 45 on 3 different occasions, but we never reached the indigenous population of Sault Ste. Marie. I could win students at the university. By then I was re-enrolled at the university. We won people at the prison. We won people that came in to work at the prisons. We won Canadians, but we could never reach Sault Ste. Marie indigents. And when we left, when we left after 7 years, our church was primarily made up of Canadians. And at that time, a Canadian came in. He was opening a church in Sault Ste. Marie, Canada, Ontario. And so we lost most of our people. And so we left shortly after that, returned to Milwaukee, continued to work with Brother Tamil, and had really not really given up on, but really didn't have much thought that by this time that we'd ever be headed back to Africa. Andrew at this time was graduating from high school. We wanted to get him a gift.
Had you ever been to Africa?
Never.
So
never.
Planted in the heart of a 17-year-old, planted in the heart of a child, all the way not even knowing God really, and definitely not in real relationship. Then you get coordinated. You try to go, you're turned down. So you go, okay, we'll go pastor. You go pastor, you're faithful, but you don't turn the world upside down. It's not like you set the world on fire or anything. So then you come back, you're continuing to be faithful. Your children have grown. How'd you end up heading for Africa?
Well, Andrew, again, we thought about buying him a car or whatever. We were very, in Sault Ste. Marie, at one time, the only job we had, Darla worked at Woolworths 30 hours a week at $3.35 an hour. And I did anything I could, clean buildings, cut grass, whatever. We just survived up there. And when we got to Milwaukee, by that time I had earned a degree at Lake State University, a bachelor's degree in psychology and then a master's in business administration. When we got to Milwaukee, I got a degree in social work and was counseling and alcohol and drug rehabilitation. And so sort of thought that's how, we were going to, that was my career. That's what was, and still work in the church. But when Andrew was 18, we were going to, scrape everything we could together and get him a gift for graduation. And I came home one afternoon and I was home alone and I picked up the Herald at that time. And there was a trip to Africa, to South Africa and Botswana. And so we got that as a gift for Andrew. And of course, Andrew said to me, well, don't think that you're going to live your dream through me. He said, I want to go on the trip, but he said, I'm not a missionary. But Andrew, when he flew back, he was with the Freemans. And when they landed in New York, he said, when the plane touched down, God told him he was going back. And he ended up being on AIM for a year and a half in Botswana. And while he was on AIM, they invited us to come and join the work in Botswana. And we went for 6 months, came home. I continued my career in counseling. By that time, I was a mental health director in a treatment facility. And one day, Brother Richardson called me out of the clear blue and asked if we would consider going to Nigeria, that they needed somebody to help in the Bible school, actually to run the Bible school. And I said, yes. I said, we'll go. And he said, first of all, it's not that easy. And he said, you really need to pray about it and, consider what commitment you're making. And I told him there was nothing to pray about, that we both knew we were called. We had both prayed. So this was God opening the door for us to go. And that was in March. And we were in Nigeria on June 1st, just 3 months later in Nigeria.
And there, folks, what you just heard is why Gerry and I get along. He and Darla are both extremely practical people. You don't tell the regional director of Africa, I don't need to pray. Yet that's exactly what Gerry just did. He said, no, I don't need to pray. Darla had her call when she was 17. I've known it since I was a boy. Let's go. I love you for it, Gerry. That's why you and I get along.
Well, the funny part of it was, he asked us to go to Nigeria, and when we got off the phone, I didn't know where Nigeria was. I had to get an atlas out and try and find Nigeria, but I knew it was in Africa, so I said, well, that must be the place.
So no bright light from heaven, no great revelation, no, angels ascending and descending ladders, none of that. Just a childhood call for both of you to go to Africa, and then a call from a human who says, we need you in Nigeria.
Exactly.
All right. So this, now help us out on timeline. So at this point, we're talking about that you have spent 7 years pastoring a church.
Yes.
You have worked in the local church in 2 different stints. You've also worked with substance abuse. You've gotten education. You've gone and spent 6 months in Botswana. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, 6 months as an aimer.
6 months as an aimer. And now you go to Nigeria. So what year is it? And how long were you aimers there?
Okay. We went in 1997. We were now, in our early 40s. And everything that we had done prepared us for Nigeria. Nigeria was very, very difficult right from the beginning, but God had prepared us for the work that He'd set before us. And so we went in 1997. We were AIM workers for about a year, and Brother Richardson said, well, you need to apply. And I said, well, we really don't, because Parkway was fully funding us, Parkway in the Wisconsin district. And I said, we're here to do the work, and we don't want to spend time on deputation. But he prevailed on us, and we ended up being appointed in 1998. And, we're on the field since that time too, till the time of the pandemic, when we had planned on retiring in April of 2020. And we ended up having to be evacuated out of Nigeria when the pandemic struck. But that was in keeping with our plan.
So you became appointed in 1998, and 3 years later, the regional director says, okay, we got to start from scratch. And so you find yourself an appointed missionary to a tough country and starting from zero. What did that feel like?
Well, we didn't know. I mean, Brother Nickerson was a missionary there at the same time, and we had no idea this was going to happen. We didn't have a previous discussion. So we were in a ministers meeting, and Brother Richardson heard from some of the senior Nigerian ministers and leaders, and he just stood up and he said, brethren, we love you, but this is not going to work. This is never going to work. He said, we're going to dissolve the United Pentecostal Church. And want you all to go home. If you decide that you want to work with us, you can apply for a license, but any office you have will not be transferable to the new work. And we got in the car and left. I mean, it all happened in probably a half an hour. So the only thing we really had was the Bible school. And ironically, the Nigerian United Pentecostal Church, they took every piece of property they could get their hands on, and they touched everything but the Bible school. But what they failed to realize, the Bible school was the treasure in the work, because we were training men and women for the ministry. And in 2001, we thought when we got there, we would have this explosive revival. We knew we were called, we got there, whatever. The revival didn't come, but after 2001, students that we had been training all of that time started to come to work with us. And that's really how the work took off. Most of the other ministers from the old United Pentecostal Church never did rejoin the organization. And so we had the Bible school and the men and women that we had trained. That really was the start of our church planting. Then Brother Nickerson and I had prayed from 1997. I mean, Nigeria at that time we'll say now, is a country of almost 200 million people. They're the sixth most populated country on the planet. And, I'd always been taught, you win, you win one at a time. But I've been praying, and I told the Lord, I said, there is no way we can reach this nation winning one at a time. There has to be another way that we can harvest more than one at a time. And at that time, Brother Nickerson, who had a prophetic ministry and really was, in my mind, had an apostolic ministry as an apostle. He came, the Lord spoke to him, and he was given the idea that we need to start teaching oneness seminars. And ironically, Brother Nickerson, to my knowledge, never taught one oneness seminar, but we had people come in. Brother Bernard came in, David Houston from Carlisle, Pennsylvania. He came in several times, but they were so successful that we realized that we couldn't get enough visitors in to keep these things going. And so that's when really I basically took over teaching the oneness seminars. And sometimes we'd have a visitor, but other times I would have a Nigerian with me, and we would teach the oneness seminars. So the work really grew through the Bible school and through the oneness seminars.
And you see behind Gerry the Shema, the Deuteronomy 6:4, and that, by the way, in the church that he built with the Nigerian church there in Enugu, where the Bible school is at, it is plastered across that very large structure as well. That the Lord our God, the Lord, He is one. And so this was the key to them reaching. And so I want to reiterate, as questions are starting to come in, I want to reiterate, and I came in with an agenda, folks. I knew my friend's story. We've spent hours together, laughing, having a lot of fun together, sweating. My Lord, I've sweated more in this man's presence than I have anywhere else. He didn't seem to be bothered by it. I was tormented by it. But anyway, I love the Nigerians. And I have to say, I don't think if it had just been Gerry, I don't think I would have kept coming back to Nigeria. I didn't love him that much, but I did love the Nigerians. And so I just had to keep coming back and teaching them. But let me remind you again, let me just pull to you again. In 18 years, from a church that has to be restarted, from a past experience that doesn't in any way indicate exactly what to do or to give confidence other than the voice of the Almighty. 212 churches with 24 preaching points, 31,000, almost 32,000 constituents, and one shy of 300 preachers. Now, please understand, in all of my Josh and my friend, I've already talked with him about this to say this to you. This didn't happen because of Gerry and Darla. Gerry and Darla were a part of this story. They were an integral part of this story, a part that we honor. But when ordinary people make themselves available to an extraordinary God, that's when extraordinary things happen.
Well, I think one other interesting thing needs to be said. First of all, Nickerson's left in 2004, so they were there a very short time and actually never even established a church. They had built one building and there was somebody in there, but they're not even with the UPC and were gone, by the time Nickerson's left. But at any rate, in the Bible school, Darla came really to, assist me, whatever, in any way she could, in the office, whatever. And one day, one of our teachers didn't show up. And at that time, we were running 3 sessions at one time. So I was teaching and the other teacher was there, but we didn't have anybody to take that 3rd class. And so I told Darla, I said, Darla, you're going to have to teach today. And she looks at me, she said, teach today? She said, I'm not at all prepared. I mean, I said, well, you have 10 minutes. It was 10 minutes to 10. And I said, look at the book. And so she went into the classroom and she told the student, she said, here because my husband told me I had to come. I said, and so here are the ground rules. I'll teach what I can, but I said, but you can't ask any questions. So I don't want any questions. I want you to just sit there and listen. And when I'm done, I'm going to leave. Well, when she got done, they were hooting and hollering and shouting and wanting her back. And she never left the classroom after that. She really became, really their most favorite teacher. So
really, they liked her better than you.
Well, I asked all the time who your favorite teacher was, and they soon found out that I was the principal of the school. It was best to say me, but most of them really did prefer her, Darlington. So,
yeah, the Nigerian people are a very strong people,
very strong-willed.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely, and very blunt. They are Northeasterners, to put it in our terms. They fit very comfortably in our quarter of the country. And so Gerry's style of being very blunt was very effective there. And I really liked going to Nigeria for exactly the same reason. They were not offended. If you spoke to them with respect, but with truth and bluntness, it would earn you favor. And they were not offended by it. So both Gerry and Darla developed a style that I very much enjoyed. It made me feel at home. I've had one pastor friend, Dr. Payton, all of you at Newark know him, says, Steve, I don't know how you pastor. All you do is insult your people. Well, I don't really insult you, but I do give you a hard time. Gerry and Darla, there was very similar fashion I found in Nigeria of their relationship with the Nigerian people. But it was extremely effective, and Darla loved to teach, and turned out that she actually came to enjoy it. Is that correct, Gerry?
Yep. She would spend hours and hours studying.
Yeah.
Hours and hours. And she'd get mad at me. She said, how is it that you can walk in and teach and, doesn't look like you ever study, and I have to spend hours and hours? But really the reality was that some of those classes I taught several times, but she loved to teach.
Well, my wife says the same thing to me. Of course, I did spend a little bit of time in study, but yes, I draw on a well. There's no question. Once you dig the well out a little bit, you can usually dip a bucket down in there and pull something up from it. So, Erica, do we have some questions for our guests?
Yes, we do.
All right, we've gone a little long, but let's ask some questions here. All right.
So, if you could give one piece of advice to a new missionary in a new country that has previously been unreached, what would it be?
And Gerry, if you don't, on your screen, you probably see Jamie Reap. I don't know if you recognize that name, but this is a buddy of mine. We met in quizzing, and he is now on the field as an aimer. So walking down a path probably similar to yours. So this is where I think he's probably up very late watching the broadcast tonight, since he is in Africa right now.
Well, I mean, I felt like when we were in Nigeria, the most important thing was to establish relationship with the people, and especially your key people. You'll find people that'll be loyal, that'll be dedicated to the work. I had two workers that brother and sister Beardsley know, Anabong and Darlington, and I really, I called them goodness and mercy following me all the days of my life. Anabong was goodness, Darlington was mercy, and really, you need those people. You need to have a well-established rapport with the indigents, or you're not going to go very far. And it takes time. They have to trust you, and that doesn't come overnight. That takes, really took years for that to settle in. But once they trust you, man, they were totally loyal.
Real relationship. I agree. Absolutely. Real relationship. All right, Erica, another question?
Can you talk about some of the things Darla had to do to run the house, groceries, getting meat, cleaning vegetables, etc., and how they handled hardships with electricity and water?
All right. Well, we never had a grocery store until probably about 2015 is when the first grocery store came into our city. And our city was a city of over 1 million people. We had shop and open air markets. Everything usually was covered with flies. So vegetable day was a whole day. You'd go in and, the vegetables came in, nothing's refrigerated. You've got to get them the first day or they're going to be rotten by the next day. Everything that she bought, she had to use a food bleach to bleach them. That took a big, wash everything, bleach everything because of the typhoid. The meat day was the same thing. They would kill a cow or a pig or whatever and just bring the meat. I mean, the moo was still in the cow. You could, it was still warm. And they kill them with a machete. So there's bone fragments everywhere. That was an 8-hour job. When we first got there, if we wanted bread or anything, she made her own bread, her own hamburger buns, whatever we needed. She basically had to cook on her own. As far as the electricity and water, I can't remember probably a day there that we had 24 hours of electricity. And of course, when the electricity's off, a lot of times there's no water either. We collected rainwater off of our roof for the first 20 years that we were there. And so without electricity, you couldn't get it pumped in. And so those were challenges that you just dealt with every day, but it was just part of the where you live. I remember one particular day, I was praying in the morning. I said, God, it was a Saturday. We were off. I said, if we could just have water, electricity, and internet today, I have so much to do. It would be great. And contrary to what Brother Beardsley said, I actually did like air conditioning, but you had to learn to go without it because you couldn't run your gen all the time. But
by the way, let me tell you, folks, Gerry loved his gin. So if you don't know what gin is not a drink. Gin is a generator. All of Nigeria runs on a generator. And he loves his generator because when I was there, he would always warn me, now, Steve, I got to give my generator a rest, man. I can't run it all the time for you now. It's got to have a rest here. So he loved his generator. By the way, let me insert here, too. I think I know why you got a grocery store in 2015. Because the Lord knew I was coming in 2016 and I was too soft to handle all of the rigor. So that's what it was. The Lord was preparing for me. Now it all makes sense, doesn't it, Gerry?
Yeah. Well, on that Saturday morning, though, the water goes out first thing. Well, we ended up having to tear up half the yard, digging up pipes that were rotten and leaking all the water out. And while we're trying to do that, then the electricity goes out, and I told the Lord, I said, well, at least we have 2 out of 3. And when the electricity went out, I said, well, at least we still have the internet. And then that went out, and I said, Lord, we can't even have one today. But that's really what it was like so often.
All right, Erica, got any other questions?
There's 2 more. Is the Boko Haram active in Nugu?
Well, they're active across the country since, I'm trying to think, but in the last 6 years, they've killed over 30,000 people, and over 1.5 million have gone into refugee camps, have been forced out of their homes. But we're in the southern part, which is southeastern part of Nigeria, which is predominantly Christian, but they have their influence everywhere, and it's one of the key objectives of Islam is to take Nigeria over. It is the largest country in sub-Saharan Africa. They feel if they can win that country, they can, it'll be the major foundation for taking the rest of Africa. We have had one of our churches had a bomb explode in the compound next to him on a Sunday morning in another church. Another one of our men, there was a big terrorist explosion in a bus depot. One of their members lost his hand in that. So everybody's been affected by what Boko Haram does. And also there's 2 or 3 groups. It isn't just them, but they all have the same objective. Anybody that we won from the Muslim world, they had to leave their area. They had to change their name. They basically had to go in hiding because they were going to be hunted down and killed for becoming an infidel.
Okay, so
Erica, before you go to that question, that, my brothers and sisters, is called being persecuted. Being told to wear a mask is not persecution. Being told that you have to preach the gospel freely over the internet is not persecution. That is persecution. Just to clarify from previous conversations, when you
Well,
have
and I would agree that whatever the government has imposed on us in America regarding the pandemic, they have not stopped us from preaching.
that's exactly right.
They haven't stopped us from praying. You know, at our church in 2020, they baptized over 107 people, I think. You know, so we continue to have revival. And ironically, our biggest revival in Nigeria has been in those northern states that are most affected by Boko Haram, because the people basically say, you know we may have to give our life for this, but this is the only way we're going to get to heaven.
Absolutely. So if you're angry with your pastor for being a little intolerant for how we have looked at the pandemic and the restrictions that we faced, blame it on Nigeria. It gave me perspective. That's all I have to say. It just gave me perspective. I didn't say blame it on Gerry. I just said blame it on Nigeria. All right.
Well, you asked the question, what is the hardest thing we had to do in Enugu? Actually, the hardest thing I had there was traveling, especially either by plane or by car. It didn't really make any difference. I could never travel alone in a vehicle. There usually were four of us. I've been shot at. I have bullet holes in a sheep's for Christ vehicle, but none of them penetrated the passenger compartment. One was still stuck in the radiator. That morning, I was going to preach at a state convention, and they just came out of the bush. They had bandanas on, were shooting away and trying to stop us. Our driver, who, by the way, is goodness, he accelerated and drove at the lead shooter because he knew they were trying to shoot him. So he was trying to protect himself. So we got away. And that morning, I was going to preach on the topic of everybody has a story. Well, by the time I got there, I had a whole new story to tell. But I do thank the Lord, as hard as traveling was there, and I was a very nervous traveler. I mean, you know, on one of my last trips that I took in Nigeria, within 1 hour, we were stopped at 44 checkpoints: police, military, road safety, immigration. I mean, and they're all hassling you. They all want something. And, you know, it was very nerve-wracking to travel. But when we got to wherever we were going, the Lord blessed. And, you know, we saw people get the Holy Ghost, people filled, you know, with the Holy Ghost and getting baptized. And so we continued to see revival. But traveling was by far the hardest thing I had to do in Nigeria, period.
Those of you that have seen our pictures from our latest trip to Nigeria, Mercy was the one driving us, and they also had another gentleman who's familiar with security, and we were stopped multiple times as well, because the last trip we were not able to fly into Enugu. They had shut the airport down, and so we flew into this little, really not a people airport, but more of a products airport.
Yeah,
cargo airport called Owerri, and then what should have been in the States would have been maybe an hour drive. Is that safe to say, Gerry?
Yeah.
About an hour was more about 2 to 3 to 4, depending upon how many times we got stopped and how bad the roads were, etc. And it's quite an experience. It's quite an experience.
Yeah, well, the roads, that's the other issue. Many of them are washed out. The major 4-lane highway that runs east and west across the country from our city through the next two major cities, all 4 lanes were completely gone. You had to drive off-road into the villages to try and get around it. I mean, a trip that shouldn't take, you know, at one time I could travel to a neighboring city in 50 minutes. It then started taking 3 hours, 4 hours minimum. It was very, and remember, there's no toilet. There's no place to get anything to eat. There's no place to stop. I mean, you have to get to your destination. Traveling, when I traveled, I had to pack 3 separate things: my clothes, my food, my, sheet, pillow, whatever I wanted to sleep in, And then, then the stuff, the tracts, the Bibles, whatever we were carrying. So it was a major, I had to carry my own stove, everything. That was the most difficult for sure.
So travel.
Yep.
Erica, a couple more questions come in, I think.
Yep. Did you know the Freemans well?
I didn't know them real well. In the interview in 1984, they asked me a question if I was appointed, if I could sit under authority, and I said that I could. And and this was to the Global Missions Board, or at that time, Foreign Missions Board. And then they said, well, if you're put in charge, can you exercise, godly authority? And I said, well, if you're asking me if I want Brother Freeman's job, the answer is no. And so I often wondered if that's why we didn't get appointed. But the Freemans, they came to our house one time because Andrew knew them. And when the General Conference was in Milwaukee in 1994, they came to our home, and we would run across paths with them a few times. But by the time we went there, there was a new regional director, Gerry Richardson. We were actually the first missionaries appointed under Gerry Richardson in Africa.
And he has now retired and has been replaced by yet another regional director.
Yes, yeah, Brother Adams.
That's correct.
Do you have any stories about people that you worked with, or do you have any favorite memories? A story about
well, favorite memories, many, many, many. I preached at one, I was invited to preach in this village church. Well, they're almost all village churches at that time. And I was preaching Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday morning. So I prepared. I knew weeks in advance I was going. I had a message for Friday night. I had a message for Sunday morning, no message for Saturday night. And for me, that was very uncomfortable. I mean, I'm prepared. I know what I'm doing when I get someplace. And so we had a great service Friday night, and it's just a little shack. It's flour sack walls, a tin roof, hotter than can be. But the place is totally packed. Many of them had never seen a white person before, and that happened often. And so the whole place was full. And on Saturday night, all day Saturday, I get up, I'm praying, I'm begging God, anything. And even when I got to church, I didn't even think I could, preach Acts 2:38 that night. I mean, I was just a total blank slate. So I'm sitting there, and they had their worship and whatever, and the pastor's getting up to introduce me, and I have no idea what I'm going to do when I get up there. And nobody can live up to an African introduction. I mean, they're so flowery, they're so over the top. And so, I mean, I'm horrified. Well, at that time, right about that time, a woman in the front who was demon possessed, she began to act out. And so she starts thrashing around, and the lady next to her tries to cast the devil out of her. No, your missionary, he stayed right in his chair. I never moved. And I'm watching this lady try to cast the devil out of her, and she can't do it. And the demon-possessed woman is getting more wild by the minute. So a second lady joins in. And then a third lady joins in. All the benches are getting kicked over. The dust is flying all over the place. I mean, it's total crazy pandemonium. And then the Lord spoke to me and he said, now I want you to preach. And he said, I want you to preach, I'm a jealous God, and I will not share my glory with another. And so I got up there and I told him, I said, everybody stop. I said, everybody close your eyes, put your hands up. I said, I came to worship the Lord. I came to preach Jesus Christ and him crucified. And he's a jealous God. He will not share his glory with another, not even a devil. Well, when I said that, the people all, they had their hands up. They all started to worship the Lord. And to me, it reminded me, or what I thought the day of Pentecost was like, that in that upper room, because all of a sudden they all started breaking out for speaking in tongues. The demon-possessed woman got on the ground, as God is my witness, just like a snake, and she just slithered across the front and out the side door and was gone. We baptized 36 the next morning. It was an awesome display of God's power, which really I had, I had nothing to do with it. I just was there at the right time, and he gave me a word, and God moved in a spectacular way.
Speaking of flowery introductions and that, share with the church, I've told a little bit of this, but you have a very wry way of saying it. When you got there, when did you figure out that you couldn't show up to church at the same time as the Nigerians? Talk about how that you, your phone calls that you would get when it was time to come preach and so forth.
Well, now in our church at the Bible school, we started on time. I didn't care if anybody was there, but when we traveled out, I just sit in the hotel and I tell them, call me when you're ready. And some of those hotels, they were such dumps. You heard me say I had to bring my own towels, sheets, everything. But to go sit out there and be eaten alive by mosquitoes and army ants and every other thing crawling through the place. So I just got to the place where I tell them, when you're ready for me to preach, call me, and I'd come.
Because they could go for how long in the pre-service before you ever get to the preaching?
Well, the first time that I was asked to preach in Nigeria, and they called it a crusade, and it was very well attended, but they never called me up to preach until 10:15 at night.
And they started when?
They started at 6 o'clock.
PM?
Yes.
Yeah. So 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah, and that's after being in service all day, having different sessions. And so really what I did after I was there for a while, when I go to a church, sometimes I just go to the church and say, if I'm not in the pulpit by 11 on a Sunday morning, I'm leaving. And they all say, okay, but they're not going to follow it. But I left 2 churches, and after that, word got out that I was going to leave. So I usually got the pulpit at a decent hour.
So, folks, I'm going to take a little prerogative here. If you ever find your pastor slightly rude with his structure, telling you, now, Erica, keep it together there. Don't laugh too hard. And we tell you, I just want to go back over it again. So the man who said, call me when it's time to preach, sounds like God can't move through that, right? 212 churches, 24 preaching points, 31,000, almost 32,000 constituents, and 299 pastors. So revival is not contingent on a pleasing personality. Just making that plain there. Gerry has a very pleasing personality, but the Nigerians don't always.
Well, thank you for that. Really, the truth is that, there was a great love relationship between Darla and I in the constituency. And even, since we've been home, I get constant emails and contacts. The church is a family.
Absolutely.
And, now I have family in 2 continents, and, it was very hard to leave. It was very difficult to leave, but there came a time that, it had to be done. And so.
I find this comment real quick, Erica. My wife, you'll enjoy this one, Gerry. One of the ways that Regina normally deals with stress is to say, what's the worst thing that could happen? She does not use that method of stress management in Nigeria because the answer doesn't help her at all.
Yeah, well, that's the truth. I could anticipate the worst on most every trip. Those trips were memorable.
Pop up Jamie's question, Erica. Yeah, perfect.
What's your favorite indigenous dish or your least favorite, or both?
All right. My least favorite was just about everything they made. I wouldn't eat their food. When they asked me to eat their food, I would tell them I was called to preach the gospel, not to eat your food. One time they were making one of their specialty dishes, and they said it was periwinkle soup. It's these little black snail type things they're filthy. It's disgusting. It's whatever. And they said, well, Brother Poitras always ate it. And I said, at that time he was in Ghana. I said, send it to Ghana. He can eat it there. But I didn't eat it. They ate dog. They eat. If it moved, crawled, whatever, they'd eat it. In fact, when Brother Phelps got there, he was so bold. He ate a deep fried maggot.
I want one of those, and you never got me my deep fried maggot. I cannot try anything once. But Gerry never found it for me because it's up in your area where I get them.
No, they're not in our area. They're really more towards the middle of the country.
Oh, is that the reason? Okay.
Yeah.
See, I still think he wouldn't get them because he was just gagged out by the fact that I would eat one.
So I would eat, if I went somewhere and they served rice and chicken, all right, I would eat that. The chicken usually was so hard you couldn't get it down. After I realized that every place you go, they want to serve you, I started bringing a student with me. And, in the US, if you go to a bar, you have a designated driver. Well, I carried a student and he was my designated eater. And so when they would serve me, he would sit right next to me, and whatever I knew I couldn't get down would get on his plate. Somehow he'd eat it, and the Nigerians would be happy. The student was very happy, and I was happy. So worked for all of us.
There you go. So you didn't eat fufu?
No, I've tried all of it, but I mean, really.
Yeah, I didn't like fufu either. It was like just filling my belly with like a rock.
Yeah, well, when they eat, flayed rats or frogs or any of the rest of it, I mean, it's just like too much.
All right, we're at the top of the hour, Erica. Any other questions that we
there's just one more that just says, who's in charge of the Bible school and church since you're back in the States?
Okay, so when we got there, probably by about 1999, maybe 2000, we had a student that was very gifted. Ironically, the student came, he didn't believe in one God. Most of our students were Trinitarians when they came to the school. He got a revelation of the Godhead. He started teaching in the school, and we trained him to be to really be the principal. And today he's the principal of the school in Enugu, and he's actually the president of all the Bible schools in Nigeria, all the UPC Bible schools. But we worked at training him for years. And so he actually ran the Bible school probably the last 10 years we were there. Darla and I taught. Darla and I would help with stuff, but he took care of all the finances. He took care of all the not all the student issues, but, most of them and whatever. But so he's very capable.
The work in Nigeria is nationalized, which means, folks, that it is now all of the positions are held by Nigerians, and it is governed. It's self-governing. And that's the goal of the United Pentecostal Church, is to, even when we found a work, and you heard us reference at the beginning or very early on in Gerry and Darla's time there, that the work started afresh. The goal of the missionary is not to keep it run by missionaries, but rather to get it into the hands of the indigenous and local people. And then for the missionary to work in cooperation and alongside of the work there. And so that was actually in process in the last few years.
Yes, we started planning for that in 2014. In 2017, it was actuated. So I, resigned as superintendent, as president of the Bible school. So Nationals held all of those offices. The first superintendent was our first graduate from Bible school. Nearly everybody on the board is one of our Bible school graduates. And then, the plan was that we knew we were going to retire in 2020. So, but we stayed for the 3 years after they nationalized to help and oversee and, whatever. And so we served them the last 3 years as basically as advisor to the national board and whatever. And then, and of course, we continued our traveling into other parts of the country and opening churches and that sort of work. But the actual running of the church was turned over to the Nigerians in 2017.
Absolutely. All right, Erica, did we cover everybody's questions, I think?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, let me say to everybody, it's been a joy to have Gerry with us. Gerry, thank you for spending an hour with us. It's always great. And when I told him that I was going to kind of make this point about that the ordinary, when made available to an extraordinary God, can produce extraordinary things, he said, well, that's why I can't come preach at your church, trying to tell me and dig at me that he was ordinary and therefore he can't come preach at my church. But Gerry, I'm telling you, on broadcast, on live, once our COVID restrictions are done, you are coming to preach at, I think, an extraordinary church, because you're an extraordinary man, and Darla was an extraordinary lady as well. But when compared to what God did in Nigeria, all of us are ordinary. But look at what God can do. And my point to all of us is to realize that whatever God is calling you to, he doesn't call you because you're qualified. He calls you because he knows how to get you ready.
Amen.
If you'll make yourself available. And that's why I asked Gerry to share the backstory. And there's so much more details. I've spent hours with this man, and so there's many, many more stories. But I hope that you got a glimpse tonight that God knows what he's doing when he puts us and allows us to go through circumstances in life. And these circumstances are all about his plan, both to be faithful to us, but also to use us within his kingdom for his glory.
Amen.
And we celebrate the work in Nigeria. I look forward to going back there at some point. And it won't be the same without Darla, Gerry. And I know that your heart breaks every time. And my friend, we pray for your comfort and your strength in this season. This isn't how they had planned things to happen. But even in this, we choose to trust that God is faithful.
Amen.
We choose to trust. One of the most powerful moments, I'll end on this, that I've ever seen in my entire life is watching at Darla's funeral as this man stood and spoke from his heart, both his heartbreak, but his absolute trust in a God who has been faithful. I have never seen a more powerful moment, and I told Gerry this personally. I've never seen a more powerful moment of a Christian standing and doing exactly what the Apostle Paul calls us to do. There is hope in the resurrection.
Amen.
And we simply got to believe it. Gerry, thanks for being on. I appreciate the time for being with us. To all the rest of you, thank you. Erica, thank you for hosting and helping us. I hope tonight this was less about missions and more about availability. Whether God's going to call you to missions, or he's going to call you to faithfulness within a local church, or he's going to call you to pastor a church, or he's going to call you to do something within the community. Availability is the key, not your capability, your availability. God doesn't need our skills. He can give us skills we don't even have. He needs our participation and our availability. And when ordinary gets coupled with the extraordinary of God, sky's the limit of what can happen. Amen.
Amen.
Join us every single night. We're looking forward. Let me remind you, have your supplies ready. We're going to celebrate communion together online this Sunday. So 2 more nights. We broadcast Tuesday through Sunday, 6 days a week, 7 o'clock, same time, every single time. If this has been your first time with us, we welcome you, and we're glad that you joined us. To the rest of you, thank you for being with us tonight. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. God bless everybody. Have a great night.